Okay, good day, everyone. My name's Daniel Piedra, and I'm your host for Book of Mormon Insights, a YouTube channel dedicated to sharing insights, testimonies, and overall experiences which we, as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, have experienced in the day-to-day lives which we live. Today, we explore the introductory pages of the Book of Mormon, as well as 1st Nephi, chapters 1 to 5. New episodes will be released every 2 weeks, and will generally follow the schedule of the 2024 Come Follow Me curriculum, which this year focuses on the study of the Book of Mormon. For those of you who are not members of the church, the Sunday school curriculum, which all members of the church worldwide follow, changes every year, rotating between the Old Testament, the New Testament, Doctrine and Covenants, and church history, and the Book of Mormon. Each of our episodes will be released every 2 weeks, and I will be joined by friends and colleagues from different parts of Canada and the United States who will join me in our roundtable discussion of the Book of Mormon. Today, I'm joined by 2 friends, Moses Agentumobi, a fellow member of my ward here in Oakville, Ontario, and Arthur Hill, who's joining us from Madera, California. I'll have them introduce themselves in a little bit here. But first, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I was born in Montevideo in Uruguay. Under the covenant, my parents joined the church in the very first year that the Montevideo Uruguay mission was opened. That was back in 1948. My mother, in fact, was baptized in December of 1948, and I've gone back and looked at a lot of the history associated with the two of them and how they came to know the church. And my mother at the time was 12 years old. The missionaries found her and her mother, and they took the discussions, listened to them carefully, prayed about it, felt the Spirit, and chose to be baptized. But there was a bit of a hitch back in those days. At the time, you needed permission. A wife needed permission from her husband to be baptized. Certainly minors did as well. So my grandfather, my mother's father, was not necessarily against the church and what they were learning, but he was uncomfortable with his wife being baptized. So he gave permission for my 12-year-old mother to be baptized. And she went ahead, and from everything that I can tell, all the records that I've looked at, my mother was probably within the first 50 baptisms in Uruguay. So it was quite a leap of faith, I think. And over my life, I certainly saw a great amount of faith in the way that she lived her life. Her mother would then be baptized about 7 years later when her husband gave her permission to go ahead and be baptized. My father was baptized about a year after that. He was baptized in December of 1949. They didn't know each other at the time. They were young. My father was 17. But again, he was probably within the first 200 or so baptisms within the entire country. So they were certainly what I would refer to now as pioneers, right? Someone who is, sort of sets a new path, and certainly it set a path for their children. My father and mother wanted to have their children all be born under the covenant. And so in 1963, they were married in one of the chapels in Uruguay. But back in the day, there were no temples anywhere in South America. And so they saved their money. They had some money set aside for what was to be their first home, but they used it instead to travel to Salt Lake City. And because my father had some contacts that he had met from the United States, when he did some missionary work in Uruguay as a ward missionary, he connected with a number of families, and they hooked them up so they could stay with them. So they traveled to Salt Lake City in 1964, and then we were sealed in the temple by Spencer W. Kimball, who at the time was an apostle, someone who he had also interacted with in many of his missionary efforts in Uruguay. So I was born a month after that, and then my brother and sister followed a few years later, and fulfilled my father and mother's dream to have the 3 of us be born under the covenant. In 1972, things were becoming a little bit hectic in terms of the economy and politics in Uruguay. And so my parents began to feel that it was probably best to move and to seek a life somewhere else. And among the places that they considered was the United States, Australia, and Canada. And Canada really just came through first with, the opportunity to immigrate to Canada. And so my parents had some contacts here as well, some other members of the church who they had met in Uruguay who had since come to Canada, to Toronto, And as a result, that's where we ended up coming to. So we traveled and started our life in May of 1972 in the Toronto region of Ontario. Jump ahead to 1985, I served a mission, the California Sacramento mission. I was called as a Spanish missionary, and I taught primarily Spanish investigators and members. And then following my mission, I went to BYU, Brigham Young University, and I finished my studies there, my undergraduate work and my master's. I completed that in 1992, returned home. And ever since then, I've embarked on a career, post-secondary education, where I continue to work today. And I'm happily married with my wife. We live in the Burlington area, and we attend church in the Oakville, Ontario ward. So that's a little bit about me. I'm going to hand it over to Moses to do his introduction so that we know a little bit about him.
Yes, thank you, Daniel. That was a really, really inspiring story, and yeah, it's good to know more about you. Yeah, so for those who have not met me or doesn't know me, my name is Moses Ajetumobi. Uh, I'm a member of the church now about 22 years. Yes, this January became 22 years. I was converted to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Yeah, so where do I start? My story of my journey of becoming a member of the church and thus far. Well, I was born in Nigeria, in the West African, western part of Africa, and yeah, in Lagos. My parents come from what we call the southwest part of Nigeria, which our native language is Yoruba. And as growing up, I grew up in a diverse religious background. Having both the traditional religion in Nigeria, and as well as Muslim, Islam, and Christianity. So I was pretty exposed to, I would say, the three major religion in Nigeria, and living with people with different religious background. And but my faith in Christ, really, the seed was planted by my mom, who converted to Christianity, and such. I started attending church with her in Nigeria, and yeah, gain my faith in Christ. Uh, I can remember, those days growing up and attending different churches with her, and getting faith in Christ. But really, to really know, the plan of salvation and what God have in store, I've had to kind of do some research and some finding faith in Christ myself, in terms of looking for the truth. And attended different churches and trying to know, what plan God have for me, and what plan He has for me. And in Norway in 2002, I met the missionary. It's actually December 2001. I was baptized. I met the missionary October of yeah, 2001. Yeah, that's right. In Norway, and became a member of the church. And so January 6th, 2002, I was confirmed a member. And 2 years later, 2004, I decided to go on a mission to the best mission in the world, Florida Tampa mission, and serve with honor, and return 2006, and got married in the temple in Aba, Nigeria temple. And as such, after that, pursue career in engineering and product and project management. And yeah, right now I'm a member of the ward at the Oakley ward here in the Toronto, Greater Toronto area. And that's where I met Brother Daniel Piedra. Yeah, I believe Nice.
Yeah, that's great.
Pretty much.
That's Yeah,
Thank
that's
you.
awesome. Yeah, I mean, when I first heard Moses's conversion story, he talked about it one time on in sacrament meeting. I thought that's a great, not just a great story of faith, not just by him, but obviously a seed of faith planted by his mother, but there should be like a fireside, you know. I think one day you should put that together and present that as a fireside. I think it'd be awesome. But anyway,
That's a good idea.
that's
Thank you.
great. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. We'll hand it over to Arthur then and let him introduce himself.
Well, thank you very much, Daniel. I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing here. I'm not a scholar. I didn't go to college at all. Uh, but I guess I got an interesting story to definitely sit here for about 2 or 3, 4 hours and tell you the whole story. But I'll give you the shortened version. So I grew up in a very impoverished family. Uh, so we had churches around in the community, of course, lots of churches where there's impoverished areas. So I would bounce from one church to another as a young child. And then at the age of 9, from Bakersfield, California, uh, which is about 90 miles north of Los Angeles, we moved from there and we came north to live closer to my great aunt, who was a member of the church. And so by the age of 9, and by the age of 8, we were introduced to the church, and my great grandmother was baptized before we were, and she raised us a lot. And so eventually, me and my brother were baptized in September of 74. Then no less, we became inactive soon after that. But I remember quite interesting that while we were going to church, that we had met a prince and princess from Ghana who was members of the church here in Madera, California in 1975 or so, in that era. So I still want to try to find who these good people were. And the about when I was turning 10 or 11 years old, I believe, my mom and dad basically left us to my great aunt, and who was a member of the church and a good faithful member. So we became active again in church for a long time, up to about the age of 16, a little past 16. And basically in my senior year, we've fallen away as a group. My brother had already left, and so I became inactive. Tried a few times to get back into the church. Got married between that time, between my inactivity time. I got married. Was in the Air Force for 9 years. Spent 7.5 in Travis Air Force Base, which is up in the Fairfield, actually about 40 miles from Sacramento. And then we and then when I turned about 31, I was tasked by who's my ex-wife now, which that she wanted to go back to church, and I was like, okay, fine. And well, it didn't mean a lot to me because it just didn't seem like I had any there was no desire, as far as I thought it was going to be a waste of time. And then things started to happen. I have no idea. I know it changed my music and all that, but a lot of things happened in my life that were very powerful, meaningful, and undeniable. But I learned of Joseph Smith's prophetic calling way before I learned of the validity of the Book of Mormon. Well, kind of hard to say that I didn't know the Book of Mormon was true based on the fact, because I did know Joseph Smith was a prophet of God. And if I said that Joseph Smith was a prophet of God, then I could say the Book of Mormon was true, but I didn't know it by the Spirit. And it was, 15, 20 years before the Spirit actually conveyed to me that this was the book, the Word of God, and there's no denying that. And so I'm 58 now. So I've been doing this stuff. I do a lot of my own work on YouTube and Facebook to just continue the conversation about our Father in heaven, Jesus Christ. I've learned so much from others. Actually, I started attending a Baptist Bible study again that I've longed to be at. They're great people. So I do a lot of different. I try to get out and spread the word of God everywhere I can, and also having the Book of Mormon in my hip pocket at any given time to render its words to those who are in need. So yes, I'm very much converted to the gospel, and like I said, I don't want to tell the whole story because it takes a long time, but my
That's another
ancestors,
fireside.
yeah, it's absolutely just a crazy life. But anyway, so with that, I have a wife and there's 8 children. It's from diversity in life, and it's a good thing, and I love all my children, my wife, and so we're active in church. As far as me and my wife and my youngest boy, we're the only ones active in the church now. So all 7 of my children are not active anymore. So
Yeah, and
and
you
I
know
don't
what?
plan on changing that at all.
I think
I want them to be happy where they're at. So
yeah, I think your introduction, as well as Moses, and I guess if you take mine, is I think a good example. It's a good cross section of whom the members are of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We're just regular people, right? We come from different backgrounds, and we don't have easy lives either. We have complex lives. Sometimes marriages don't work out. Sometimes we encounter difficulties in our lives, and death and all sorts of things. So we're no different than anyone else, right? And we can learn from anyone else. And I think you hit a point there about the internet and how you're working with the internet to reach out to different people and share the message, and they share their message. And yeah, it's wonderful, right? But I think it's excellent how the 3 of us come from very different storylines. We've all come to the gospel in different ways, and that's probably very representative of the way God's children are today, right? So
absolutely, absolutely.
yeah.
That's right.
Anyway, thanks for sharing that, the 2 of you. Wanted to give everybody watching a little bit of background in terms of who these fine folks are. And we'll have other guests over the next few weeks, and we'll also have the 2 of you back again. So it'll be wonderful. But without any further ado, let's jump into the reason for this particular gathering, for this particular YouTube channel, which is to share our experiences, our testimonies, our insights into the study of the Book of Mormon. As I mentioned earlier, members of the church have the opportunity to study the Book of Mormon every 4 years as a set piece of our Sunday school curriculum. But as we all know, our Sunday school classes are about an hour long, usually less than that. So it's difficult to sometimes get into all sorts of topics, especially if you're the type of people that like to study and really dive into many different resources. So I thought, there's a lot of stuff that I could talk about, and I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that my colleagues and my friends could talk about and share, and why not, right? Let's put it all together, and we can all learn from each other and edify each other. So that's really what this is all about, and it's an opportunity for us today to just kind of go around the horn, around the table, and talk about different things. And so I want to start off with just the general topic, right? The larger topic, which is essentially just the Book of Mormon in general, as a concept, as a book of scripture. Without diving into anything in particular yet, we'll get into the introductory pages, and we'll get into the first 5 chapters of the first book of Nephi. But for now, let's just kind of concentrate on the Book of Mormon in general. And I'm just kind of curious. I'll let one of you, whoever wants to jump in, go first, and just your general thoughts or impressions or anything that you want to share just in general in terms of what the Book of Mormon is and what it means to you.
Yeah, can I go?
Yeah, go ahead, Moses. Yeah.
Go, jump, Don, jump.
Yeah. the Book of Mormon, to me, as it's another testament of Jesus Christ, and which, looking at it from, I would say, from a legal point of view, right? You have two witnesses of Christ that we know of. You have the Bible in the Middle East, and then you have the Book of Mormon, on the Americas, on the American continent, and both, at different point in time, we have prophets and inspired men and women testifying of Christ. And so that to me kind of it gives comfort that and give me the assurance that yes, Christ is indeed our Savior, and He's walked this earth, and He came to die for our sins, and took upon Himself our transgression. And on that note, also, with the Book of Mormon coming forth through the prophet Joseph Smith, it's a miracle, and really, I don't know. I try to sometimes look at it from logic point of view. And there are a lot of things that you can confirm with logic, but really, you really have, for me, I have to, soften my heart and my mind, and kind of digest and pray, and to know of the truthfulness. So the Book of Mormon, it's the fruit of the prophet Joseph Smith. So in my experience, when I joined the church, I was baptized. I have to admit, I didn't have the sound testimony of prophet Joseph Smith. I just, know that the missionary taught me, and, yes, he was a prophet. But not until I actually was converted and got the testimony of the Book of Mormon, and then everything else makes sense. So I would say the Book of Mormon is the fruit of the prophet. So it shows that if the Book of Mormon is true, which I know to be true, the prophet Joseph Smith is true, then everything else that come after that must be true. So that is kind of the equation for me. And yeah,
Yeah,
I have to say.
I love that phrase, the fruit of. I don't think I've ever heard it stated like that. I mean, often in the church we hear that the Book of Mormon is the keystone of our religion. That's sort of a phrase that's used a lot, which essentially means the same thing. I love how you put it though, the fruit of an individual's labor. In this case, it's the fruit of Joseph Smith's translation work and all that was related to that. And yeah, I mean that's certainly, I think Arthur, you touched on that, right? That one is tied to the other, right? And sometimes people come across the Book of Mormon first, and they gain a testimony of the Book of Mormon, which leads them to a testimony of Joseph Smith and the restoration and everything else that follows. And sometimes it's the other way around. They get the testimony of Joseph Smith first before they even read the Book of Mormon. And but both of them are certainly tied. You can't separate one from the other because of the miracle that was the bringing forth of the Book of Mormon.
So,
Yes, thank you.
did you want to continue on, Moses?
No, go ahead.
I'll talk. So
Yeah, go ahead. I'm
So,
listening.
so anyway, the Book of Mormon, and how do we look at it, and look at it as it's something unique to itself, but also a companion to the Bible, which is a very important book to Christianity, and the Book of Mormon only really is impacts a very small percentage of those who would proclaim themselves to be Christian, considering the numbers that exist within Catholicism and all the Protestant and evangelical sects. So it only impacts a very small group. But what is its importance to the world? And I think about how the debate continues on, the discussion continues on between Latter-day Saint theology and Christianity, or Catholicism or Jehovah's Witnesses or any other sect. It continues on because we have differences in our perception of how theology works within our within our lives. The Book of Mormon it's like, why do we have the temple? Because it brings up discussion. Why do we have the Book of Mormon? Because it brings up discussion. But more than just that, it does guide us back to Jesus Christ. The central figure in the Book of Mormon, 1.6 verses or less, is something to mention the Christ and his work. So it's the central figure of the Book of Mormon is Jesus Christ, and all hope is suspended or necessitated by Jesus Christ. Without Jesus Christ, we have no hope. This world is a waste to us, and it has no value. But again, without the central figure of the Book of Mormon, which ties it back to the Bible, it really has there's a beautiful marriage between those two. If you don't trust the Bible, here's the Book of Mormon, and I know of at least a couple of people, one personal to me, who read the Book of Mormon and found Christ. And I'm sure there's plenty of others out there that have read the Book of Mormon and found Christ or found peace. I found peace in the Book of Mormon when I was going through some very hard times. So it is the keystone of our religion, and as Don Moses said, it's the fruits of the prophet Joseph Smith, and you will get closer to Jesus Christ in its pages and its text by reading it more so than any other book that you can read. And
I
so
think
that's my
Yeah, I think it's a very valid point, right? That the Book of Mormon works really well in conjunction with everything that's taught in the Bible, whether you're looking at the Old Testament or the New Testament. There's a lot of connections between the two, and often it's the Book of Mormon that provides clarity to those concepts that are taught in the Bible that perhaps are not as clear. For me, the Book of Mormon became very important in the summer of 1985 because that was when I was about 2-3 months away from going on a mission. I had already received my mission call, and it dawned on me one day that I had yet to really read the entire book, right? I had done what a lot of youth do, right? They read bits and pieces, they never get through the whole thing. And more importantly, I didn't know that I had my own testimony, my own witness of the truthfulness of it. Certainly, I hadn't received that through the Spirit for myself. I had basically been going on the testimony of others, whether it was my family, whether it was my seminary teachers or Sunday school teachers or whatever. And so I set out that summer to read it, and I was working in downtown Toronto, and I was traveling from where I lived at the time. It was about an hour bus ride. And I decided, I'm going to read this. And I started reading and I just got into it so deeply, and I felt the Spirit. And it didn't matter where I read it, whether I was on the bus or whether I was on a break or whether I was at home. I kept feeling the very powerful Spirit of it. And it was really step number one for me at the time. A, because I read it for the first time. B, because I had now my own testimony, and I could now go on a mission, with my own testimony, and I could testify of the truthfulness of it, not because others had told me it was true, but because I had read it and I had prayed about it and I had felt the Spirit witness the truthfulness of it to me. And so I felt really, like I had taken one huge step, right, in terms of gaining that testimony that I needed to have. But then I guess that for me, where it became even more powerful was through my mission. And about three months into my mission, our mission president circulated this little booklet. I don't know that you can still buy it. Probably buy it somewhere. Somebody probably has it somewhere. You can get it. And he handed this booklet out to all the missionaries throughout our mission. We had about close to 200 missionaries in the mission. And he asked us to read it intensely, and that we would be reviewing it at district meetings and zone conferences and all that kind of stuff. And it was a very short book. I think it was like less than 80 pages. And I remember reading it, and it was a very powerful concept that, we convert people through the Book of Mormon, that it is the number one instrument that we use, and that we shouldn't be afraid or embarrassed about it, because those who are earnestly, humbly seeking the truth will take it upon themselves to read it, and will pray about it. And I'm sure anyone, Moses, you've been a missionary, I'm sure you've encountered the differences between individuals who really don't show any interest. And that's fine. Maybe they're not interested today. They will be one day, but that's fine. We all have free agency to decide what we want to do and what we want to study. But those who do come with an interest and are humble and read it earnestly and pray about it, they feel the Spirit. And they don't even have to read the whole book to begin to feel the Spirit. So this booklet was really, really important to me, because it really showed me over my mission how powerful of a tool it is, and how it can really, take us into many directions in bringing people into the church. So I think that one was particularly helpful to me. That was at the beginning of 1986. And then what happened was, in the fall of 1986, so October conference of 1986, President Benson had been chosen, as the president of the church. And can you guys see this right now? The Book of Mormon, Keystone of Our Religion slide?
You have
the Word document.
right now.
No. Oh no. Okay, hang on.
I don't think you have the schedule up there, but
No, let me put a different. I think I may have selected the wrong.
I just wanted to mention the Converting with the Book of Mormon is available on at Amazon. It looks like.
Okay. So it's still around, right? Okay, here's what I'm trying to show. There you go. Okay.
Okay.
So this October of 86, so only about 7-8 months after I read this little booklet and we started using it a lot in everything that we did, President Benson, in his first address as president of the church, October of 86, spoke about, and the title of his talk is The Book of Mormon, Keystone of Our Religion. And you probably read this in the past. It's referenced often in different lessons. But in that talk, he quoted the Lord 7 different times in the Doctrine and Covenants. And these are the principles that he shared, right? That it is a true book of Scripture, that it contains the truth and his words, that it's translated by the power from on high, that it contains the fullness of the gospel of Jesus Christ, that it was given by inspiration and confirmed by the ministering of angels, and that it gives evidence that the Holy Scriptures are true, and that those who receive it in faith shall receive eternal life. And so those are really powerful statements from the Lord himself about the Book of Mormon, which I've always thought was, very powerful. He also went on to say in his talk, and this is a great promise too, right? He says that there's a power in the book which will begin to flow into your lives the moment you begin a serious study of the book. You will find great power to resist temptation. You will find the power to avoid deception, and you will find the power to stay on the straight and narrow path. Right? So wonderful blessings there. And the key here, I think, is that you don't have to read the whole book to begin to feel that power. He says the minute you begin a serious study of the book, and what a serious study is, it could be anything, right? You can study it by topic. You can study it from beginning to end. You can take one book only in the middle, wherever you want, and study just the one book. There's many different ways of studying the Book of Mormon, but as long as you're studying it earnestly, praying about it, the Spirit will provide you with not just a conviction of its truthfulness, but look at these wonderful blessings, right? Like, who doesn't want to have the power to avoid deception, and the power to stay on the straight and narrow path, and the power to resist temptation? So those are wonderful blessings. And then another one I just want to share here with you. You may have seen this quote in the past too. Marion G. Romney, who was an apostle, said that he feels certain that in our homes, if in our homes, parents will read the Book of Mormon prayerfully and regularly, both by themselves and with their children, the spirit of that great book will come to permeate our homes and all who dwell therein. The spirit of reverence will increase, Mutual respect and consideration for each other will grow. The spirit of contention will depart. Parents will counsel their children in greater love and wisdom. Children will be made more responsive and submissive to the counsels of their parents. Righteousness will increase. Faith, hope, and charity, the pure love of Christ, will abound in our homes and lives, bringing in their wake peace, joy, and happiness. So amazing blessings there, right? Just too many to get into right now with the time that we have, but just wonderful blessings. Again, just if we dedicate ourselves to reading the Book of Mormon as a family and individually, these are some of the wonderful blessings that, you know, the Lord has in store for us. So just wanted to share some of the overall sort of blessings that lie there for us as we begin to read it.
I just wanted to fill in one other thing on that. When it said that the Book of Mormon will be evidence to the Bible and its validity.
Mhm.
And if you think about the Bible, it already has a large enough following that pretty much everybody falls in line with it. Within because of because their parents already believe in the Bible, so now they just believe it because it's there. But the Book of Mormon has a unique position because it's not accepted by much, but because Jesus Christ is mentioned so animately in the pages of the Book of Mormon before his birth, that any evidence that would basically validate the Book of Mormon without question. And then there's plenty of evidence out there for me that's validated the Book of Mormon without question. But let's say that we produce the plates, all right, validation, all right. So no longer can you say now the impact that would have on itself, the Book of Mormon, but the impact it would have on the Bible would be a greater magnitude of overwhelming evidence for Jesus Christ and his and who he said he was than what we have from the Bible trying to validate it within itself. Self-validation doesn't work. It has to have an outside source to bring about true validation.
Yeah, and I think that's that crossover between the two, right? Because there's commonalities. There are prophets that are mentioned in the Bible that are also mentioned in the Book of Mormon. There's some prophets that are not mentioned in the Bible, but yet are mentioned in the Book of Mormon. Zenos, Zenock, for example, that we know were part of the prophets that were teaching Israel at the time, but you know, we don't have their teachings in the current Bible, but yet they were obviously important enough that they're cited quite often in the Book of Mormon by the Book of Mormon prophets, who of course came from the old world, right? So yeah, I think you're right on there, and it's an interesting position that the Book of Mormon has. Any other go ahead, Moses.
Yes. So for me, when I again think about my testimony of the Book of Mormon, and you know, when I was on my mission and trying to help people to gain the testimony of the Book of Mormon and convert to the gospel of Jesus Christ, a very common misconception is, oh yeah, it says in the Bible that there is no more revelation in our day, that it's sealed, in the Revelation, and that tells a lot about, what like the understanding of a lot of Christian believers, not really understanding what the Book of Mormon actually serve. It's is there to support and be a second witness, and also to clarify things. Like we do know that in the Bible, when we're saying you shouldn't, nothing should be had, to the book. Paul himself was on an island, and he was writing and speaking of the book of Revelation, not the Bible as a whole. And that, I know, like that
I
looking
think
at the
you mean
book of
Peter,
Mormon.
right? Peter Or
Paul.
John? Are you talking about John?
Sorry, John,
Yeah.
John,
Okay.
John,
Sorry.
John, John,
There you go.
John. That was what I meant, John. Yeah, and he wasn't speaking of the Bible because we didn't have the Bible then, because again, history. So my point here is understanding history, knowing how the Bible is compiled, became the Bible, which come from, if I'm not mistaken, the Greek word tabibla, meaning the book or collection of books, and knowing that will help us to actually understand that, the Book of Mormon, also collection of books, and with different testimony of prophets, is supports the Bible, which is collection of books. So they both come together to witness the great work that Christ is done, and what his atoning sacrifice really means to all mankind. So again, I think understanding history and really helps to clarify a lot of things, and help people to. So when I was on my mission, I have to kind of explain that to people, that God still speaks to man, still speaks to us today through a living prophet. And I wouldn't have known that if it wasn't for the testimony of the Book of Mormon. Again, because the Book of Mormon is true, that it comes from, it's like if a tree. If the fruit from a tree is good, then the tree is good.
Right.
So that goes with the prophet Joseph Smith and every other thing that the church stands for. And that is a major testimony for me.
That's great. I want to just jump on something that you said there, which I really like. The fact that many people assume that the Book of Revelations is the last book that was written, right? I'm not sure that that's necessarily that they're all the books in the Bible, specifically the New Testament, are actually in the exact order that they were written, right? So that's another thing to keep in mind. Whereas the Book of Mormon is pretty much in the order that it was intended to be, because for the better part, Mormon wrote it. And the last book of the Book of Mormon, the Moroni, was written by his son, and it was the last piece that was added, right? So we do know that whatever's in the Book of Moroni was the last thing written by those prophets, right? Whereas that's not necessarily the case in terms of the Old Testament and the New Testament. But definitely, I think that's where that history comes in. And I also find it interesting, you said that a lot of times people will say, yeah, not supposed to add anything, and yet those are often the same people who will say that God is the same today and yesterday and tomorrow. So to me, it's like, okay, but if God spoke to man yesterday, right, why wouldn't he speak to us today and tomorrow? Right? If he's the same, that part doesn't make sense to me, right? And I we know that the Lord does speak to his prophets, and that he has, and he will continue to speak, and he will continue to reveal many great and wonderful things, right? That's one of our 13 articles of faith.
Something that you just mentioned about the chronology of Bible versus the Book of Mormon. And we do have ether that's being presented that is about a people that is 1,500 years before the Nephites, approximately the Lehi trek. But yet, ether actually fits chronologically, and I'll tell you why. Because ether is being used by Moroni to reveal his own plight, his own despair of his own people through the eyes of a people that came before him in the same way, in the same destruction. And then it only covers the Jaredites within the first 3 or 4 chapters, and then he starts to write again about his own plight and the people and what they're going through at that time. So even with ether, it still chronologically follows the storyline.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, that the first part of ether is the Jaredite history, but a lot of ether, right, is Moroni actually sharing information that he feels is very important for us to have, right? And I mean, the other thing is that the Book of Mormon does have some twists to it in terms of timing, right? And in the book of Mosiah is a good example of that, right? And I read something recently that had, and when we get to that part, maybe I'll share it, but when that the book of Mosiah, if you actually read it in the exact order that it happens, you'd be jumping around the entire book, because you'll recall that, for example, they have overlapping stories that happen, right? So for example, the Mormon will cover off the story of Zenith and his people. And in order to do that, he has to go back in time to tell the story of Zenith that leads to King Noah, that leads to Limhi, and how they come back together. And there's like multiple groups there happening, right? So yeah, sometimes there's some odd timelines in terms of the Book of Mormon, but essentially it does follow, a pretty clear path from beginning to end with some twists in between.
I think
complex.
Yeah.
I call them complexities. It's
Yeah.
just a phenomenal complex way of, I'm sorry, Moses, I'll let you in. But I'm just saying he's called it odd. I just want to call it complex, because the genius of Joseph Smith, or prophetic calling, which I would claim, is just over the top.
Yeah, so looking at the placement of the Book of Ether, it's sort of like a good bridge between Mormon and Moroni. So kind of maybe connecting the past, present, and the future, kind of a purpose there, showing how the people, the record, from the records of the Jaredites, that Ether abridged, and now Mormon and Moroni himself, at the same, facing the same situation, and his people haven't been wiped out, and you have to preserve these records. I think it's quite interesting to see similarities between both of them, and how Moroni did a good job in kind of bringing that to light.
Yeah, I actually think that the brilliance of Moroni is how he wraps up the record. Okay, I think he thought he was going to wrap it up in the tail end of the Book of Mormon, right? Mormon's book in the Book of Mormon, because he's certainly speaking that way, right? The last few chapters of the Book of Mormon. But then obviously he encounters more time, and decides, probably inspired, to add, as you said, the Book of Ether, which is his abridgment of Ether's record, which I'm sure was way, way bigger in detail, right? But he provides us with enough, right? A thumbnail sketch. And then he finishes his own writing, again, with some time of things that he wants to make sure that we understand, that we have. So I think that's the brilliance of Moroni, right? That he has this time, and he feels inspired. The Lord inspires him to add certain bits and pieces that his father wasn't able to, because by this point his father has been killed in battle, and now Moroni is pretty much on his own, if not completely alone. But yeah, I also think that the book of the Book of Ether, or the Jaredites, is to me a second witness. And we always talk in the church, right, about witnesses, how the Lord chooses more than one witness. He often teaches things, and there will be two or three different witnesses. And the Book of Mormon in and of itself is a second witness of Jesus Christ and the gospel of Jesus Christ. But I always have looked at the Book of Ether as a second witness, a second testament to what can happen to a civilization when they leave the Lord and they turn against him. And so you have the two of them. And I think Moroni sees that and says, I got to share this. This information is important, because if you think about it, there isn't a lot of doctrinal information in that Book of Ether, at least when he's retelling the story of the Jaredites. He adds doctrine later about faith, charity, hope, but that's him speaking. But within the story of the Jaredites, he's really just trying to show us, here's what happens when, again, a similar civilization to the Nephites, they go up and down, and they're up and down in terms of their success and their happiness and joy, only happens when they turn to the Lord. As soon as they turn away from the Lord, they start encountering difficulties, battles, and they lose, and they eventually become completely destroyed, right? So I think that's kind of his way to share his second testament to us.
And I'm absolutely convinced 100% that the Book of Mormon was written for our day. when the incident of George Floyd came about, and we were engaged in the Book of Mormon Come Follow Me program. Every event that was happening in the world that time, especially in the United States or Canada, whatever it looks like, but United States especially, you could predict what was going to happen through the Book of Mormon, because every week, it would follow the same kind of destructive nature, or it would just follow the storyline. Even with my own life, there was a chapter within the Come Follow Me where the people of Ammon, I believe, they no longer carried their father's names because of the wickedness of it. And then I had one of my boys come to me that week. He doesn't know about Come Follow Me, but he's telling me, I want to take on a different name. My last name. I want to change my last name.
It's
like,
yeah, it's sad because
it follows everything.
Right.
It's crazy.
It's sad. One of the things you see right before the coming of Christ in the Book of Mormon, there's that period of quite a bit of corruption and destruction, right? And only the real, the righteous are allowed to survive and to be there for when Christ appears to them. But prior to that, people begin to break up into tribes, and they divide themselves up, right? And kind of the same concept there. And I see a lot of that happening in the world today, where Satan uses words that sound really good, right? Words that you would think should bring people together. Words like inclusivity and equity. And those are all words that are supposed to bring people together. And yet they're not. They're taking us apart. They're dividing us up into almost tribes, right? And I see that being so sad. And yet it's something that is clear in the Book of Mormon, and how it led to people, instead of being united as, children of God, they became, just disjointed from each other, and it brought a lot of unhappiness, unfortunately. So, but anyway, I think we need to move on here.
Yeah.
Those are great comments, and let's move on so we can talk a little bit about the introduction and those kinds of things. And before we jump to that, let me just share a quick.
Right. Can I add something? It's
Yeah,
just a
sure, go
question I
ahead.
have for myself too. We know of the three people or set of people that left Jerusalem for the Americas. I know, we speak a lot about, Lehi,
Yeah,
and the
Jaredites.
Jaredites, but we often forget. I mean, we call them the Molechite, but
Yeah.
I know the Book of Mormon doesn't call them that. Probably, I think probably call the people of Zarahemla or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, we don't really know much about them, and that would have been interesting. Actually, I don't know if Arthur, have some point. If it's okay by you, Dan, or if you also have
Yeah,
some
sure.
around
I
that.
don't have much information to add other than what you said. You're right. It is kind of a forgotten group, but it is one of the three groups that was led to the new world by the Lord, right? One of the sons of Zedekiah is able to escape, and Mulek, and he brings his family and others with him, and they form another group that comes to the new world. And unfortunately, I think we've lost most of their story, because I think it would have been part of the book of Lehi, which, as we know, had a lot of information around King Mosiah, and it was King Mosiah the first and his people who leave the original land of their inheritance to go to a new land, right? The Lord instructs them to leave and to go in search of another land where they can basically leave their enemies. And it is they who find Zarahemla, right? And he and his people are the last ones left of that group, right? But I have a feeling that we probably would have known a little bit more about them, but we have very little about them now as it currently stands, right? In what we have in the small plates of Nephi, the first part of the Book of Mormon.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. So let's jump to this. I just want to show this graph here. And this is something I've seen in different different variations, and I love it because it's a great overview of everything that comes together to form the Book of Mormon. And so if you look on the left side there, you see that these are the raw documents or records that are compiled over the history of about 1,000 years. And each of those form what will eventually be the Book of Mormon, which we end up with in sort of that third column, which is what we end up with in terms of what Joseph Smith was actually given. So, again, back to the left side, you have the record of Lehi, which becomes abridged by Nephi, the plates of brass, right, which are quoted often, again, within the first and second book of Nephi, which are part of the small plates. Benjamin's speech is there. The record of Zeniff and his people is there. The record of Alma. Those are all abridged by Mormon. The records of the son of Mosiah, the epistles of Helaman, Pahoran, and Moroni, Captain Moroni, and the battles and all of that. That would have also been a part of the records that Mormon had to take and abridge. And then the records of Nephi, the apostle, the records of the Jaredites, and documents that Mormon would have had himself, right? I'm sure he didn't just have this one draft. He had probably a lot of records that he had kept himself. And so all of those come together, right, and are formed into that second column there. And so up at the top, you have in that red square there, you have what we would refer to as the small plates of Nephi, the first and second book of Nephi, Jacob, Enos, Jerem, Omni, and the words of Mormon, which he inserts when he finds this record and he feels that he needs to add it to, to his records that he's got. Now, we're not clear that the scholars, the Book of Mormon scholars, are not clear whether this becomes a part of the plates that Joseph received or if it's a separate set of plates. Doctrine and Covenants section 10 adds, I think, a little bit of insights into that. But then you have the rest of those plates that are also brought together there. And as we know, the book of Lehi is the part that gets lost, right? The lost 116, possibly more than 116 pages, according to some other sources that were close to Joseph. But whatever the number was, it was significant enough that we lose around 400 years of history there that Mormon intended to be part of the original Book of Mormon, but it gets lost. We can talk about the story of that another day and how that is lost. But it's unfortunate because we lose a lot of information there that I think we would have had today. Fortunately, the Lord had prepared Nephi, had Nephi prepare the small plates, and those small plates become sort of the substitution for the lost book of Lehi. And fortunately, we have that, and then that brings it together to what we have today. There were the sealed plates, and interesting enough, we talked about the book of Ether. The book of Ether also does refer to the sealed plates. Right? It doesn't tell us what's in there, although basically we know that it's the vision of the brother of Jared, everything that he saw from the beginning to the end of time, very similar to what Nephi would have seen. But Moroni does tell us that we will not receive the sealed plates until we show the type of faith that the brother of Jared had. So I think we have a ways to go before that. So anyway, any thoughts or comments here with this?
Yeah, I was just going to say the brass plates that the boys go back and get from Laban. You bring them to the Americas, they're protected. They're a great value to the Lord, because when he presents his law to that will be how he judges mankind, and those plates are preserved in the Americas, kind of because there's so much archaeology going on in the Middle East and those places. They could have been found where now they're hid, but I mean, I think there's a preservation thought there on that part.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the brass plates are the source of a lot of what Nephi uses, right? In the first and second book of Nephi, when he's quoting Isaiah, there's a reason he does that, right? And we can get into that when we get to those sections, but clearly Nephi uses Isaiah as a way of teaching about the redemption of Israel. And his family is a part of Israel. And he's very concerned because he has seen the future of his people. And he knows that they're not all going to be redeemed. Many of them are going to be destroyed. But he also knows that there will be descendants of his brothers that will receive the teachings in the latter days, right? And that's what's happening right now. And so he wants them to know that they are also of the house of Israel, which is one of the things that we'll look at in a second in the title page. But yeah, definitely that book is very important. The book of Jacob 5, right, provides basically a summary of the allegory of the wild and tame olive tree, which comes from, again, from Zenos. And other prophets are also quoted, Zenock, from the breastplate. So that's essentially where they're getting a lot of their teachings, for sure. Okay, let's move ahead then, and we'll talk a little bit about, we'll jump to the introductory pages that come at the beginning of the Book of Mormon. So this is everything that includes the 3 witnesses, the 8 witnesses of the Book of Mormon, Joseph Smith's witness, and a little bit of the history that is provided there, as well as the title page. So anyone want to jump in with anything on any of those topics?
I guess we probably kind of mentioned if you're speaking about the introduction page, I would like to share something.
Sure.
If I have it here, it says, concerning this record, the prophet Joseph Smith said, I told the brethren that the Book of Mormon was the most correct of any book on earth and the keystone of our religion, and a man will get nearer to God by abiding by his precept than by any other book. It says, we invite all men everywhere to read the Book of Mormon, to ponder in their hearts the message it contains, and then to ask God, the Eternal Father, in the name of Christ, if the book is true. Those who pursue this course and ask in faith, we gain a testimony of its truth and divinity by the power of the Holy Ghost. So those 2 paragraphs, the first one, one thing that jump out to me is the word, keystone of our religion. And I think that goes with what I mentioned earlier, and you were also, you touched on it earlier, what does it mean, keystone of our religion? Means, to me, means if the Book of Mormon is not true, then what we believe, it's built on a sandy foundation. So, but knowing that the Book of Mormon is true, everything else, it's like a keystone. If you remove the keystone, from the structure of the ark, everything will collapse. So we cannot remove the Book of Mormon from the belief of the church and of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Then
Yeah, and
everything
again,
else
that's a
follows.
wonderful promise, right? A very powerful promise, right? That a man can draw closer to God through the precepts of that book more than through any other book, okay? Which doesn't mean you can't draw close to God through the Bible, through the Old Testament, New Testament, but there's something that is very powerful about the words within the Book of Mormon and the spirit which conveys the truthfulness and teaches us about it, that I think is just very special. And those who have given the book a chance, who have read it sincerely, with an intention to know the truth, will be able to know that, right? We can all testify of the truthfulness of it because we've encountered that, we've done that, and yet the promise is there for everybody. Right? So yeah, great point, sure.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I know there's a friend of mine who read the Bible and read every religious book he could. Because of his past, he never could sleep at night. He told me, he said, I can't sleep at night, but yet you give me that book, and every night that I would read that book, I would be able to sleep through the night without having these dreams that would wake me up, because he was in Cambodia during the Vietnam War, and he was doing some very horrible things to people to in war. So, and these things would give him nightmares. the atrocities he had to go through. But he said that Book of Mormon gave me peace and gave me a place to sleep. But I was just here's something that I'm reminded of. The it's both for Gentile and Jew, the Book of Mormon. And here's the bold statement. I'm like, Joseph Smith, what are you doing? This is in Alba. This is 150 years before the Christ comes. All right. And he says plainly that he would be born to Mary in Jerusalem. She would be a virgin. He would be the Son of God. And other places in Alma 5, I believe, the name Jesus Christ is presented, and also in Nephi, I believe, the name Jesus Christ. What a bold statement to, and you're thinking to you, and I'm like, what is Joseph Smith trying to do here? If he's trying to create a book that is trying to appeal to the masses, then you don't put things in there that are going to set you off and say, oh, he's just plagiarizing. He's just using common things that we know about already, and he's trying to draw people in. But there's a magic to what's going on here, because then Jesus Christ introduces himself. I am he who was prophesied. I am he that will bring about salvation. I am he. That's powerful, because in the Bible, and I've talked about Third Nephi with Daniel before, there's a Third Nephi seems to fall off the face of the earth when it comes to somebody's connection to the character, because Jesus Christ has already done all the exciting things over there in Jerusalem and places like that, and we come over here and he's like doing all the same things, and so it's kind of like, okay. But when he says I am he, that brings a lot of power, because over there he doesn't have to do that in such a mannerism to convince them, because they already know who he was. They already seen him die on the cross. They already seen his resurrection. So he's not really saying anything new to them. But when he comes to the world where the Nephites and Lamanites and all these people are, he's saying, I am he, which is validating to the world that I am the Messiah. I am the resurrected one. I am the Son of God. Powerful.
I think one of the differences is that when he presents himself to the Nephites, he does say that, but the effect on them is very different from what was experienced in the old world, right? They receive him and they were expecting him. And as such, he's able to do things with them that he couldn't do with the people in the old world, just because of their great faith, right? And we'll get into that when we get into Third Nephi, because there's such amazing events that occur with the children and the apostles that he selects. But yeah, it's just they're at a different level of acceptance. They're prepared at a different level when he comes. And he's able to do so much more with that faith that they have. And as a result, the faith lasts for 2.5 generations, and they become among the most righteous people to ever live on the earth, probably. Is it any wonder? I just wanted to touch a little bit on the testimonies of the individuals that appear. Sometimes we forget about these testimonies, especially those of us who have read the Book of Mormon and we have a testimony. We forget that there's testimonies there of individuals that were called upon to witness to the world, right, of the truthfulness of not just the Book of Mormon as it sits today, but of the plates themselves. And so it's interesting. I don't know if people are into numerology. The number 12 is a really important number, right, in the ancient world, and particularly in the House of Israel, for many reasons. There's 12 tribes, it's 12 apostles. It was a number that represented wholeness. And it's interesting, if you count the witnesses, right? There's 3 witnesses, there's a group of 8 witnesses, and there's Joseph Smith as a witness. And that adds up to 12, which I thought it's quite interesting. But it's, when you look at these witnesses, the testimony of the 3 witnesses, right? They have seen the plates, okay? And they say, we also know that they have been translated by the gift of and power of God, for his voice hath declared it unto us. So they've heard the voice of God. They also testify that we have seen the engravings which are upon the plates, and they have been shown unto us by the power of God and not of man. And we declare with words of soberness that an angel of God came down from heaven. He brought and laid before our eyes that we beheld, and we saw the plates and the engravings thereon, and we know that this is by the grace of God our Father and Lord Jesus Christ. So they go on to add a few more important words there, but very powerful, right? They heard the words of God testify of the truthfulness. They saw the plates shown to them by an angel. Okay, so that's a really important witness of three individuals there, who, again, is Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer, Martin Harris. We know that Martin Harris and Oliver Cowdery do return. They left the church for a period of time. They came back, but at no point did they ever deny their witness. And David Whitmer, although he never returned to the church, never denied what the witness that he gave there. And then the witness of the eight is also really interesting, right? Because they testify that Joseph Smith, the translator of this work, has shown unto us the pages, or sorry, the plates of which hath been spoken, which have the appearance of gold, and as many of the leaves as the said Smith has translated, we did handle with our hands. So they actually handled them. And we also saw the engravings thereon, and all of which has the appearance of ancient work and curious workmanship. So again, there you have another 8 individuals who have seen and testified to the world. And that's an important part, right? Again, the Lord uses multiple witnesses to testify of the truth of everything. And in this case, it's the truth of the Book of Mormon.
I think, Dan, you're right. We don't really refer to these testimonies a lot, and that's kind of sad, because these are like people that have seen and beheld. And as you mentioned, very important, like, even though at some point in their lives, some that maybe had struggles, that left the church, but they came back, but they never denied, the testimony they once gave of the Book of Mormon. I mean, that alone, it's a big testimony to me that, the prophet Joseph Smith is called of God to translate the Book of Mormon, and that there are people before me who have witnessed it, and they gave their testimony and their witness, and they never denied, and that is solid. Thanks for pointing that out, actually.
Yeah, it's very, very solid. And I think sometimes we sort of skip over that, right? Because when we read it, we say, well, I've got a witness of it. I read the book. So we kind of get right into, and with the other thing we skip often the title page, or we don't really dive into that. And yet the title page is the first book, or the first part of the Book of Mormon, because it was written by Moroni. It wasn't written by Joseph Smith. It was the last part of what the author, in this case, the final author, Moroni, intended us to read. And he places it at the tail end. It was the last part, it was the last plate that Joseph translated. But it's placed at the beginning because the difference is that back in the ancient world, title pages or introductions were placed at the end of documents, whereas today we place things at the beginning. And so since the book was published in 1829, we're in a different time where we tend to place these types of introductions and these types of title pages at the front. And so there it is now at the beginning of our Book of Mormon, but it was written by Moroni, and it was the last sheet of the plates that was actually translated. And I think it's worth looking at that too, right? There's a lot of wonderful things in there. It's very clear there as to, what the purpose of the Book of Mormon is. If you look at that title page, you can look at it using the 5 questions that we often ask about everything, right? Who, what, when, how, and why. And if you go through the title page, who was it written for? Well, I think, Arthur, you already alluded to this, right? It was written to Lamanites, it was written to the Jew, and it was written to the Gentiles. And that pretty much includes everybody, right? Everybody in the world. It's intended for pretty much everybody. What is it? It's an abridgment of the Nephites and the Lamanites. It also includes, as we said, the history of the Jaredite people. when it was sealed by the hand of Moroni to come forth in the latter days. So sealed by Moroni around 420 AD or thereabouts, and then prepared for our day today, right? So that we would have it. How? Well, it tells us that it's by way of commandment and by the spirit of revelation that it has come forward. And then I think the final question is why, right? Like why do we have the Book of Mormon? And I think the three main reasons that are given in the title page are, number one, that it shows the remnant of the house of Israel what great things God has done for their fathers, right? So that they can gain some appreciation for what God has done for their fathers. Number two is that they may know the covenants of the Lord, the covenants that the Lord has made with his ancient prophets that are extended to all of us who become part of the house of Israel. Number three is the convincing of all that Jesus is the Christ. That is the main message, as we've said. Both of you have touched on that earlier about how it is the central message of the Book of Mormon, that Jesus is the Christ, and that is the purpose of the Book of Mormon. I think, Arthur, you mentioned that there's a reference to Christ in some way every 1.6 verses or something to that effect. Yeah, definitely. There's more references to Christ in the Book of Mormon than any other scripture that is out there. And then this one is one that we can discuss when we get to the Book of Jacob. I've read a lot from Joseph Spencer, who's a great Book of Mormon scholar at BYU. He believes that another purpose of the Book of Mormon is to show us the inequality or how women were treated unequally. And there's many examples of the Book of Mormon where, unfortunately, women are not treated the way the Lord would like to have his daughters treated. And that's a different topic we can get into. I just throw that one in there because it's food for thought, particularly when you get to the Book of Jacob. And Jacob begins to talk about relationships between men and women and how the Lamanites have actually treated their wives better than the Nephites have. So we can plant that seed for discussion for another day. But clearly there's a lot of great content in that title page that, again, to skip it and move right into First Nephi would be a disservice, I think, to each one who's reading the Book of Mormon.
I had a thought just come up, and with the Book of Mormon and with the movement of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, at the time that this was going on, there was also a rise in violence towards Native Americans. Eventually, Andrew Jackson wipes out a bunch of my people in Oklahoma or in the Trail of Tears. Again, how much does the Book of Mormon play a role in kind of trying to remind the people that these are God's people that you're slaughtering? You got to stop it immediately, because these are not just something that came from an egg or from evolution or something like that. These are God's people, and you're destroying them, and you're calling them savages and everything else to vilify them so that you can promote your cause. And like I said, the Book of Mormon seems to, I think, to me, it plays a role because he's going before Congress. He's running for president. So the Book of Mormon, and it's all over the papers, the Golden Bible and things like that. So how much is this being used by the Lord as a way to stop the slaughter of the people, of the Americans and Native Americans?
Yeah, definitely. I think the Book of Mormon positions early, settlers of the American continent as a people that were not perhaps as wild and ignorant as sometimes they're portrayed. They had knowledge, great knowledge, in particular those who had this experience. And we already know that there were three groups that were brought to the American continent, so more than just the Nephites and the Lamanites. And they had knowledge, great knowledge of the world and of God, right? And there's a section in the Book of Mormon where it makes reference to the fact that the Earth rotates around the sun, right? I don't know if you remember that. They knew stuff like that. So we sometimes, I think history sometimes positions people from a different time is perhaps not as knowledgeable. But yeah, those are people, those societies that certainly advanced to a great deal. Unfortunately, they also learned the hard way through their unrighteousness that, you know, things can become more difficult in your societies when you leave the teachings of God to one side. Okay, anything else in terms of the title page? I think we should probably move ahead then if there's nothing else.
The title page, as far as, I thought, did we get to the witnesses? Are we going to skip those or what?
I talked a little bit about the witnesses, but jump in if you wanted to add anything about the
Yeah,
witnesses.
I just real quick, I was reading the names of all the witnesses, the 8 witnesses, because we already know it's easy to remember Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer, and Martin Harris, and they
Martin
lead
Harris.
the church. But a lot of people don't remember that after John Whitmer, I believe that's the father, if I remember correctly, when he dies, the family basically leaves the church. That includes the witnesses that are Christian Whitmer, Jacob Whitmer, Peter Whitmer Jr.
I think it's Peter Whitmer. Peter Whitmer is the father, I believe.
Okay, Peter Whitmer, okay, but he's not mentioned in the 8 witnesses then. So my mistake, but like I said, after Peter Whitmer Sr. had died, or is it Peter Whitmer Jr. who's the father?
Yeah, maybe you're right. I'm just confusing, but I get
Yeah,
your point.
I'm confused right now too. But what I'm saying is they all left. Hiram Page left. But the only 3 that didn't leave, but died with their testimony, was Hiram Smith, Joseph Smith Sr., and Samuel Smith. And all the rest of them were it was Hiram Page and the Whitmers who left the church.
Yeah. And again, none of them, as we said earlier, none of the 3 or the 8 witnesses ever denied.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the important part, that regardless of where they went in life, right, whatever happened to them, that's understandable. I mean, it happens today, right? Like, you know, you told your story earlier, Arthur, about not always having stayed in the church. And, you know, life happens and sometimes things, you know, take us in a different direction. But, you know, in this case, they didn't deny what they had seen and what they had handled with their own hands. Right.
Well, not only that, don't forget the mobs that were constantly coming after these people.
Yeah.
They went through struggles that we can't understand. And so I give a very, I look at them and say these great men withstood all the pressures of the world that I not understand. And yet, you know, their testimonies live on. So anyway,
yeah, absolutely. All right, let's jump to the first book of Nephi. You know, we don't have to go chapter by chapter here. There's 5 chapters that were assigned for this week's reading. But in general, I'm just looking for some insights that you might have about all 5 of those chapters, or 1 or whatever. There's a lot of stuff there that I'm sure gets covered off pretty quickly in the 1-hour lessons that are going to be held next week, where this will be covered. I'll start up just with a couple of thoughts. There is the concept of the Exodus is something that I think most Christians are familiar with, just because of the general Exodus from Egypt by Moses leading the Israelites out through the desert and to the promised land. And I think it's interesting to read the Book of Mormon with that in mind, because the experience of Lehi and his family is very much an Exodus experience. And there's a lot of similarities. And so as you read particularly the first book of Nephi and the second, look for those similarities, because there are some very, very definitive connections there that make this Exodus a very similar experience to what Moses and his people experienced, right? They were in a desert. Lehi and his family were also in the wilderness for a period of time. They were heading somewhere that they didn't know. It was a promised land, but they didn't know anything about it, right? They were led through the water, right? The Israelites were also led through the water. So there's a lot of similarities there, which I think are really interesting and would have probably made some sense to them, because they knew the story of Moses, right? And there are references to Moses several times by some of the prophets. So I think I can't help but think that they kind of saw what was happening there. And sort of put themselves in that position. The other thing I want to share was just a little bit of the history of Lehi. Lehi is clearly, most of the Book of Mormon scholars believe that he was not only a man that was well off, but he was probably a merchant. He was really adept at travel. Notice how when they travel, when they leave, first of all, they're able to leave very quickly, which probably tells us that he's accustomed to traveling. It's not something brand new to him. Generally, in those days, when you traveled as a group, you traveled with camels. Why camels? Because the camels were the best way to carry large quantities of whatever it is you're carrying. In this case, it probably would have been the tents. Those tents are not little pop-up tents like we use when we go camping. They're large. They're quite large and heavy. And all of that, plus some of their belongings and some of their rations that they carried, would have required, camels. So definitely a merchant such as Lehi would have been well equipped to travel, would have known how to travel too, would have known exactly where they were headed, right? Remember that they did not get the Liahona until they were almost at the water's edge, ready to go across to the promised land. So they knew where they were headed, right? They were not going into foreign land. And the other thing that we know too is that Lehi, the very beginning of the Book of Mormon, right? The chapter 1, verse 2, in fact, says, right? I make a record in the language of my father, which consists of the learning of the Jews and the language of the Egyptians. So why the Egyptians? The Egyptian language was one of the languages that was used a lot in terms of trade. And there's really good opportunity or good chance here that Lehi, again, was very well familiar with the language because of his involvement in trade and travel back and forth. And so it makes a lot of sense that that they were ready to leave. And when the word came from the Lord, they were able to leave pretty quickly and well prepared.
And at this time, also, I mean, the Egyptian nation is well sophisticated society, in time of maybe in science and maths and all that, so medicine. So Egyptian were probably the known language for all, for both in scriptural term and as well as probably in the secular terms.
Yeah, from what I've read too, I understand that the language, the Egyptian language, would have been a more condensed form of writing, which was, used up less space, basically, right? So it was more economical.
Yeah. One thing though that I wanted to point out in defense of Layman and Lemuel. I mean, imagine, our day we live in a very advanced world today, as we believe. We have internet, we have high-speed internet, we have, cars. And I mean, imagine if, suddenly you were just, you were woken up by the bishop, or like, okay, Dan, come on, you pack your stuff and we are going to the wilderness.
Yeah.
Leaving everything they ever knew behind, and just to follow, their father who Lehi said has seen a vision and he has to leave. It must have been very, very tough for them, but that's where faith comes in, though. That we have to believe and trust in the Lord. But
Yeah,
in their defense, it must have been very, very tough. Given, if I were to be told the same thing now, to leave everything I ever knew, civilization, there's electricity,
yeah, you would question it. Like you would wonder, like, really? Are you sure? Right. And they didn't necessarily, like, there's a lot made about Layman and Lemuel, right? Murmuring and not kind of wanting to go and all that. But at the very beginning, they do go. It's later when they start encountering difficulties in the wilderness that they start wondering and doubting whether they really should be out there and who's really leading. Is it really the Lord that's telling us to do this? And again, I don't necessarily think that we think about them as you did right there. I think that sometimes we just kind of go over the story of Layman and Lemuel. Oh yeah, they're murmuring, they're the bad brothers that don't want to obey mom and dad. But yeah, I think you have to look at it from a humanistic point of view and put ourselves there. How would we have reacted? I mean,
Yes.
would we have been quick to just, okay, yeah, let's go, move out the door? We might have had the same thoughts, right? And I think something that that I read, which was really interesting, which puts this into a different light. Let me just share this with you. This is from the book of Deuteronomy. This is Deuteronomy 13. Okay. And the heading for this is the Lord tests his people to see if they will worship false gods. Prophets, dreamers, relatives, or friends who advocate worship false gods will be put to death. Idolatrous cities will be destroyed. These 9 verses here are really worth going over and reading this, because this section of Deuteronomy essentially raises an awareness or a warning to not follow after prophets or dreamers who come with ideas that go against what the God of Israel has taught people, right? And the only reason I bring this up is because Laman and Lemuel would have known, they would have studied the Torah, just like Nephi and Sam. They would have been taught in the way of the Lord. And I can't help but think that they must have been thinking about this and thinking, is this what's happening here? Is our brother one of these? Is our father one of these? The scripture here tells us to beware, right, of verse 6, if thy brother, the son of thy mother, or thy son, or thy daughter, or thy wife of thy bosom, or thy friend, which is as thine own soul, entice thee secretly, saying, let us go and serve other gods, which thou hast not known, thou nor thy fathers, namely the gods of the people which are around about you. And the whole thing is all about, dreamers and visions and prophets, right? Number 3 here, thou shalt not take not hearken unto the words of that prophet or the dreamer of dreams. And here's Lehi saying, I have dreamed a dream, right? He comes right out and says, I have dreamed a dream, and the Lord has told me to do this. I can't help but think that Laman and Lemuel are probably thinking, like, really? Is this for real? Or is this one of these things we were warned about, right? So I think we have to be careful not to be too quick to condemn Laman and Lemuel, because they weren't dumb, right? But maybe they were referring back to this as a source for them, as a context as to why they were struggling with the whole thing. So I just share that because I think we are often very quick to just divide them up. Nephi righteous, Laman and Lemuel unrighteous, and it's not that simple, I don't think.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, you just ruined my next statement here.
Oh,
but
sorry.
I'm gonna throw it in there anyway.
Yeah, go.
There was something. There's a couple of thoughts that I had here, and it came to, and this is in the first Nephi 1, and it's verse 19. And it came to pass that the Jews did mock him because of the things which he testified of them, for he truly testified of their wickedness and their abominations. He testified that the things which he saw and heard, and also the things which he read in the book, manifested plainly of the coming of a Messiah, and also the redemption of the world. So he's also telling them that Jerusalem's going to be destroyed. But in this period of time, in Deuteronomy, there's a group out there, Margaret Barker, I just listened to her today, who's a scholar of scholars, Old Testament theologian from Methodist Church. And she was talking, and this is a video, it's 3 years old. It's the Deuteronomist Reformist, which Deuteronomy seems to maybe be written in the time of Josiah, which is a king that is of Judah, which is from 640 BC to 609 BC. So he could be very much influencing this narrative. But again, the Book of Mormon seems to remember that there was the plain and precious things that were removed from the Bible, and we have the fullness of the gospel. And you put those two things together, and the gospel is the good news of the Messiah, Jesus Christ, being the Son of God. And that is the plain and precious truth that seems to not be written in the Old Testament at all. There's some I read through some of the prophecies of the Old Testament that concerning Jesus Christ and his coming, or the Messiah, and they're very vague references to a Messiah. Versus you read the text in the Old Testament concerning the Book of Mormon and its coming forth, it's a lot more clear that you have a second witness that'll eventually come forth. And so again, that plain and precious thing would have been very much the Jesus Christ that is mentioned in the Book of Mormon so plainly in the years before he becomes
Yeah,
and
I think what you mentioned there about, they mock him in terms of what Lehi said to them. I mean, Lehi has to also be well aware of the fact that prior to him, I mean, Jeremiah wasn't exactly received well. Arijah had been executed. Okay, he fled to Egypt, and then they extradited him back, and he was, put to death, not in a very good way, without even a burial, which was a real insult to a person of that descent. But then you had Zenos and Zenock and Nahum as well. So these are prophets who had come by with the same message, and yet the people aren't exactly responding very well. So I think Nephi or Lehi realizes that, hey, yeah, this is a tough message, but I have to deliver it. And, he also realizes that his life is threatened, which is why the Lord instructs him to go away. I also like verse 20 in chapter 1. The very end of that, I think, is where Nephi kind of tells us what the whole Book of Mormon is going to be about, because he says, "But behold, I, Nephi, will show unto you that the tender mercies of the Lord are over all those whom he hath chosen because of their faith, to make them mighty even unto the power of deliverance." So despite all the things that you're going to read, right, he says, I'm going to show you that the tender mercies of the Lord are extended to all those who show their faith and obedience to him. Right? And then he proceeds, obviously, to tell us his story there. Other thoughts about what's in those first 5 chapters? I know obviously we're dealing with the story of having to leave, having to go back to get the brass plates, and then having to come back to to their father's tent.
I think in chapter 3, when Lehi sent his sons back to Jerusalem to to retrieve the plates. And again, this is where when Nephi showed a great example, the famous chapter 3, verse 7, where Nephi said, "And it came to pass that I, Nephi, said unto my father, I will go and do the things which the Lord hath commanded. For I know that the Lord giveth no commandment unto the children of men, save he shall prepare a way for them, that they may accomplish the thing which he had commanded them." So I think that is quite a powerful verse, where Nephi, he has to show great degree of faith in the Lord and in his father, who is called as a prophet to lead his family and other group of people out of Jerusalem. But imagine if they hadn't come back. So that verse, it means everything to what we believe today. Because I mean, how would we have known about the brass plates and maybe other records that is in the Book of Mormon today, which is now, the stone, as the gospel of Jesus Christ is everywhere, every corner, practically every corner around the world. The stone cut without hand, as he said in the book of Daniel.
That's right.
So,
yeah, and I think that scripture is used a lot. It's one of those seminary scriptures that the youth learn because it has great value to everything we do in life, right? That sometimes we don't know and what's going to happen. Nephi demonstrates that, right? And and this was not a simple thing, right? Like it wasn't. We know it's not as simple as just having gone back, knock on Laban's door, and walk away with the records. They had to go back 3 times, right? The first time they just go and nothing happens. They have to escape. The second time they try to bring some of their wealth and to exchange for the plates, and that doesn't go over very well. And then when they're about to give up, Nephi's the one that says, "No, let's go back one more time. I'll go back." And he doesn't even know what he's going to do, because he says, "I knew not what to do," but he just went into it with faith that the Lord would show him the way. And I think in life, a lot of our life is like that. We don't know exactly how things are going to turn out sometimes. We go into it with a bit of blind faith, but we have faith that the Lord will help us, right, with whatever we need to, and will give us some direction. But I think the verse that you quoted is really interesting to go and look at. Take a look at First Nephi chapter 5. Okay, have a look at verse 8. I'll read this out because this is the connection of that verse. You'll recall that, Sariah becomes very concerned, and she starts murmuring that her kids aren't back. And, it's perfectly understandable that a mother and a father would worry. Of course, they don't know what's going on. They are probably thinking in their minds, okay, well, they left a certain while ago and they were going to get the plates, and why aren't they back? What they don't realize is that there were 3 different, trips back and forth to try to get those plates. So that would have added time. But when they finally come back, she realizes at that point, and I think it's where Sariah gets her testimony. Up until then, I think she's been kind of going on her husband's words, trusting in him. But this is really where her testimony, I think, is cemented, right? Because she says in verse 8, and this is amazing because she pretty much quotes what Nephi said in chapter 3, verse 7. She says, "Now I know of a surety that the Lord hath commanded my husband to flee into the wilderness. Yea, and I also know of a surety that the Lord hath protected my sons and delivered them out of the hands of Laban and given them power." Here it is where she kind of quotes what Nephi says, "Given them power whereby they could accomplish the thing which the Lord had commanded them. And after this manner was the language that she did speak." Right? So she kind of puts it together. Exactly what Nephi had said is now something that she's quoting, and now she gets it. Right? So it's a great moment of growth for her. We often say, oh, they were murmuring. Who hasn't murmured? We all murmur about things in life, right? If I counted the number of times I murmured, it would be, easily triple digits, I'm sure. Right? So it's just
Yeah.
human tendency.
I was just
Another
gonna,
thing.
Moses, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Arthur. So just before, the thought that comes in mind, is this, the iceberg picture that represents success, in life. And, at the top, people see the iceberg, right? But deep down, many people don't really see how deep the iceberg go, below the water surface, right? And there are a lot of things that we don't see. Like here, today we see the Book of Mormon, which is a great success story. But what we don't see is the failure, as you mentioned, that Nephi and his brother had, and the setbacks, and the doubts, the hard work, and the sacrifices, the risk they have to take. Their lives were at risk, and but they had to summon courage and took action, and with the passion for the work of God, and being persistent, and the rejection, criticism, dedication, innovation, the vision and dreams. So, sometimes we can liken this to our life, right? We should liken the scriptures to our lives today. How much of success um, Nephi obtaining, and his brother, we can't forget them. It's a team effort, right? Obtaining, he was the leader, but obtaining the records was a big success story. But deep down, there was a lot of things that many people don't just see in our lives today. People will see Dan or Arthur, it's what the great things you've achieved, but really I don't know how much of the hard work and sacrifices that you've had to put to get to where you are today. I think that is a
And
good thing.
yeah, and if you fail, try again. Because,
Yes,
they
failure is
could,
part of success.
right. They could have turned around after that first try, gone back to their father's tent. We tried, but, we had to escape. And, yet they knew that they had to figure it out somehow. So that's a great lesson. Sometimes we just have to stick it out and try again. Doesn't matter if we
Yeah.
failed, try again.
Here's an interesting thing that about Lamb and Lemuel and the difference between the three. Sam seems to be like just kind of not. He just seems to be content to follow Nephi a lot of times. But here's what Nephi does compared to Lamb and Lemuel and Sam. He goes out and he prays, And after speaking with the Lord, he comes back to the tent of his father, and then the father says, "Have dreamed a dream." And it's kind of interesting. I don't think Nephi, I just thought about this. I don't think Nephi would have had the courage to go out a second or a third time, or a third time, excuse me, a third time, I believe is how the story lays out, because Laman and Lemuel basically take and start beating him. And here's the angel of the Lord who chastises the older brothers, say, "What are you doing with your younger brother? He's going to be your leader in time, and here you are beating him down." But I think that helps Nephi also understand the value of this work. That even an angel will come and and do and make a difference in what was happening in his own life. So he's on the hook to go make sure that the plates are 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 obtained from Laban.
You notice how in scriptures, when you see when there's an angel that appears, it's usually really good news, or he's there to sort of straighten you out, right? Alma, Paul, right? They saw angels, but it wasn't exactly because they had some great news to share, right? They were there to straighten them out. And this is what's happening here too, right? Trying to straighten out Laman and Lemuel. But I think, one of the great characteristics of Nephi, at least you see it a lot here in the first book of Nephi, is that he wants an understanding, and he wants to feel the same thing and see the same thing that his father has. So he wants to have a genuine testimony of everything that's happening, so that he knows through the Spirit that what is being asked of him and what is being asked of his father is of God, as opposed to just kind of going along. And that's a great characteristic to have, to want that, which is why, he seeks after answers and seeks after the same vision of the tree of life that Lehi saw, and many other things. So great characteristic there. Just wanted to share, let me just share one last thought here, I guess, and we probably should wrap this up soon here. This is a great visual that I found in, this is actually one of Joseph Spencer's books with regards to the first book of Nephi. And this is a breakdown of how the Book of Mormon is divided when you look at it from the original chapter. So I'm not sure if everybody knows that the original chapters of the first version of the Book of Mormon were very different from what we have today. The book that we have today, the number of chapters was essentially added or created in 1879, I believe it was. Orson Pratt went through, and for the purpose of making the book maybe a little easier to read with shorter chapters, he went through and recreated the numbers of chapters into pretty much what we have right now. The Book of Mormon has gone through a number of other slight edits in terms of the format to get us to where we are today, but that was the bigger change. However, these are the original chapters that Nephi wrote. So chapter 1 is what we have today in Nephi 1-5. And it's really, when you look at the breakdown here, it helps you understand what he was trying to do. So chapter 1 for him, which is our chapter 1-5, is Lehi's first visions, the departure from Jerusalem, and the return of the plates, right? And then chapter 2 for Nephi was our chapter 6-9, which is the second return for Ishmael's family, right? Because they're going to return one more time to get the daughters so they can marry, and the dream of the tree of life. And then chapter 3 for Nephi is our chapter 10-14, which is Nephi's long vision of Israel's history, all the visions that he receives of the past and the future. And then chapter 4 is Nephi's explanation of his father's dreams to his brother. Chapter 5, which is our first Nephi 16, verse 1-19-21, is the desert trek, the building of the ship, the ocean voyage, and the prophecies that happen. Chapter 6 is the quotations of the brass plates that he shares with his brothers, quoting from Isaiah. Again, a lot of that is his concern for the redemption of Israel and the redemption of his family, his brothers. And then the last one chapter 8 for him, which is our chapter 22, is Nephi's explanation of Isaiah to his brothers. Right. So I think when you look at that, it adds a little bit of context to what the author really intended here, and the author being Nephi at this point, because this is all first person, right? This is not
Is that
Mormon writing.
chapter 8 or chapter 7? Is there another
7.
chapter?
That's chapter 7.
Okay, okay,
Yeah, the last one there. Yeah. So I think it's interesting to look at that, because Nephi clearly organizes things in a specific way, which is not evident to us when we look at our chapter headings today, because it's a little bit different, right? But certainly I'm very appreciative of Nephi as a writer. I've also grown very appreciative of Mormon. And I think as we read the whole Book of Mormon this year, we're going to get to that point, basically in Mosiah, where Mormon takes over and begins to write. And he's a fabulous writer. Like, he has very intentional reasons for using specific stories. He uses a parallel narrative often, where he shows two sides to everything. Okay, a good example of that is, for example, he'll show a righteous king, King Benjamin, and then right after that he'll show an unrighteous king, King Noah, to show the differences in things that happen. And he does that a lot throughout the entire Book of Mormon. And I just can't help but be so grateful for Mormon and what he did. And I'm reminded, that this whole thing for Mormon started when he was 10 years old. Right? If you read the Book of Mormon, chapter 1, his Book of Mormon, chapter 1, right, he tells us that Ammoron hid up the records of the Lord, right? All of the records that had been kept by the Nephites up to that point. And he was 10 years old, he being Mormon. And Ammoron comes to him at the age of 10 and basically says, I perceive that thou art a sober child and art quick to observe. Right? Can you imagine saying that to a 10-year-old today? Right? Like, I don't even know that there's 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds that are sometimes that sober, right? But he basically says, the scripture goes on to say, therefore, when you are about 20 and 4 years old, I would that you should remember these things that ye have observed concerning this people. And when you are of that age, go to the land of Antum, unto a hill, which shall be called Shim. And there I have deposited unto the Lord all of the sacred engravings concerning this people. And behold, ye shall take the plates of Nephi unto yourself, and the remainder shall ye leave in the place where they are, and ye shall engrave on the plates of Nephi all the things that ye have observed concerning this people. Like, what an unbelievable, instruction to give a 10-year-old, right? Not just, hey, I see that you're a pretty bright, sober child, but by the way, when you get to 24, which is 14 years from now, right? You haven't even lived 14 years yet, but in 14 years, I want you to go and get these records and be prepared to summarize and write the history of your people, right? So obviously the Lord, gave Ammoron an insight here into the fact that this was a very special young man, and he was going to be able to do a great work for his people and for us, and for, as it says, the Gentile and the Jew and everyone else in the world. So I'm so grateful to have, his writings and to be able to study them this year. And I'm grateful that the Book of Mormon has given me so much strength in my life. So I'll give you guys a chance to just give us your closing thoughts, and then we'll wrap it up. So Moses, you want to go first?
Yes, sure. Thank you so much, Dan, for inviting me to this podcast and to have the opportunity to share my thoughts and my testimony of the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon and the Prophet Joseph Smith. I'm very grateful, and I do know that yes, the book is true, and it's translated and brought forth by the Prophet Joseph Smith, who is called of God. And today the gospel has been restored, and we have a living prophet who speak to us today. And yeah, I'm very, very grateful, and I know that Jesus is the Christ, and that yeah, God loves us, and I'm very, very. I love the Lord, and every opportunity I have to share my testimony, I take it. So thank you so much. This has been really uplifting.
No, thank you. Thank you for sharing all your wonderful insights. I appreciate it. Arthur?
Thank you, Moses, and thank you, Daniel, especially putting this thing together, Daniel. I know how hard it is to coordinate and get everything going. But sometimes I'll say something and like, where am I getting that stuff from? So one of the things that I mentioned that the brass plates were preserved for a future time. And if you read in chapter 5 of Nephi at verse 17, it starts, and now when my father saw all these things, he was filled with the Spirit and began to prophesy concerning his seed, that these plates of brass should go forth unto all nations, kindreds, and tongues and people who were of his seed. Wherefore he said that these plates of brass should never perish, neither should they be dimmed any more by time. And he prophesied many things concerning his seed. Realize that the manuscript that was written by the hand of Oliver Cowdery, that was the translation of the Book of Mormon. I think we've only got about 30 different pages left that are able to read. We have the printer's copy manuscript, and we've got the whole thing there because David Whitmer was able to preserve that. But you think about, paper doesn't last very long, but the brass and metal plates are a permanent mark from God to his people. And again, it can be destroyed too, but that's why he preserves them in places where others would not look to say, well, I'm going to find something here, But again, the Book of Mormon is I was listening to all the talks that were given by the prophets and apostles today from the introductory sources. And one of the things, are you excited about the Book of Mormon? Is it something you have to have in your life to to really have any value? And you got to go back, and if you're a member, go back and watch those comments by the prophets and apostles, because they're very insightful. But I'm whenever I talk to people and people that are concerned about today's world, I start to get excited, because now I can pull out that Book of Mormon and say, look, it's all here. You read this book, you'll understand where we're at in God's eyes. And there was an instance that I was talking to a couple of females, and one was listening to me, and I'm telling her line by line how the Book of Mormon is written for our day and all this. And so I go back to my car and I grab two of them, and she takes it, like, grabs onto it and like can't wait to read it. The other lady, she didn't want nothing to do with it, but which is fine. Like I said, I'm not, but if the Book of Mormon is a great tool to help people through through where they're not sure why things are happening as they're happening. It helps with life. It helps with understanding our society and where we're at in our timeline of the rise and fall of great societies. And for me, it's absolutely the Word of God. There's no question about it. And I appreciate, again, Daniel and Moses for sharing time with me and give me this opportunity to testify of its validity.
Yeah, thanks to you too.
Thank you,
for
Arthur.
your different insights and your personal stories as well, to both of you. And I'm sure we could sit here and talk about this, and we're only scratching the surface, really, but that's kind of the intention here, is not to cover every single verse. We'd be here for hours if we did that, which probably wouldn't be a bad experience, but we have to move on with our lives. And I appreciate the two of you giving me of your time today. And hopefully, folks will be able to watch this and find some stories that may edify them, or some insights that will help them in their study of the Book of Mormon, because there are many of those that probably should be shared. And so we'll call it a day, and we'll see everybody for the next session, which will be in about 2 weeks' time when we continue to study and drill down into the Book of Mormon. So thanks very much to both of you.
Thank you so much,
Thank you,
Daniel
Dan.
and Moses.